Hello, and welcome to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel and moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator, Alicia Moody, Global Human Resources Director, Thermo Fisher Scientific. We are excited to have Alicia and our panelists for a panel discussion titled Connect, Engage, Thrive, Tools and Techniques to Create Fair and Inclusive Employee Experiences. Welcome, Alicia. Over to you.
Thank you, Nick. So as shared, I'm the moderator for today's session, and my name is Alicia Moody. I'm a Global HR Director with Thermo Fisher Scientific, a biotech life sciences organization that supplies analytical instruments, life sciences solutions, specialty diagnostics laboratory, pharmaceutical, and biotechnology services to other organizations. I have over 12 years of experience serving in such areas as recruitment, HR program management, project management, operations, talent, strategy, consultation, implementation, and I'm based out of the Portland, Oregon area. Now let's meet our session panelists. Maria, can you kick off our panel introductions?
Of course. Thank you, Alicia. And it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Maria Bonashek Soto. I'm the Senior HR Director for Global Operations and Distribution for Cooper Surgical. Our company specializes in medical device, both for surgical purposes, but also in general, as well as fertility solutions. And our motto and our vision, mission, and direction is to actually support and help women wellness and overall health. We have about 3,000 employees, and for myself, I have about 15 years of experience in various areas of HR as well. So Shelley, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Maria. Welcome, everyone. My name is Shelley O'Keefe. I'm the CHRO of Associa. We manage communities at Associa. So if you live in an HOA, a master plan community, a condo association, we work with your boards of directors to achieve the vision that you have for your community. We have about 16,000 employees worldwide. We are a very diverse company. I look forward to contributing to the discussion today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Cheska.
Hi, my name is Cheska McKibben. I'm the VP of Human Resources for Cloud Imperium Games for our US studios. We are an international independent game company of over 1,000 staff in Europe and in North America, and I've been with them for almost 10 years and based out of Los Angeles. Over to you, Hyla.
Hi, my name is Hyla Wallace, pronouns she, her. I'm based in San Francisco and have been working in the people, programs, and operations space for over 12 years. And starting earlier this year, I have the pleasure of leading the talent operations team at Checker. Checker has about 1,300 employees across the US, Canada, and Chile. And our mission is to build a fairer future by designing technology to create opportunities for all. Our primary product is rooted in the background checks process, and we are a proud employer and advocate for the Fair Chance talent. Back to you, Alicia.
Thank you, panelists. Looking forward to this discussion today. So now let's move on to our focus by leaning into the discussion about what a fair, inclusive, equitable, and connected employee experience looks like in today's workforce. I feel to discuss this topic, you first must understand the meaning of these terms. Fairness can be seen as good judgment to determine just treatment for all colleagues in the workplace. Equitable is a workplace where everyone receives fair treatment and equal access to opportunities. Connected employee experience, while this can have multiple meanings, at its core, it's about one being engaged with their company, colleagues, and work performed, which can not only lead to personal and professional growth, but enhance company innovation, productivity levels, and ultimately revenue. Now, to have a fair, inclusive, equitable, and connected employee experience for colleagues, a company would clearly need to be intentional and rigorous in its effort to first understand the different perspectives and cultures on its team to be able to respond with implementing and enhancing a work environment that is fair, taking in these different perspectives that would inform how to provide equal access to opportunities and truly engage colleagues to unlock their potential and the company's. This starts from the beginning of the colleague experience, from recruiting to every phase of their colleague journey with an organization. The voice of all colleagues must be heard as one broad stroke. Without hearing it would not create a fair, equitable, connected colleague experience, as all voices would not have been heard to make that possible. Many organizations have colleague experience surveys, business resource groups, community-led initiatives and committees that can help tap into the voice of their colleagues to evolve their policies, recruiting, pay practices, and approaches to make sure everyone is serviced, seen, and treated fairly. Thus, the response to colleague voices is that change has to be visible and constantly evolving. It takes effort, but it's effort worth investing to retain one of the company's most critical resources, colleagues. I'm proud to work for an organization that takes a lot of care in collecting and responding to our colleague voices, as well as working continuously improving on that effort to make sure we are all better together. Now, I want to open this question up to the panel in case any of you have thoughts to share on this topic as well, on what a fair, inclusive, equitable, and connected employee experience looks like in today's workforce.
What I liked about this question was just the inclusion of connected, because I think that, post-pandemic, we all have challenges and trying to reconnect our workforce, regardless of kind of where people work and how they choose to work, or how the company is making choices around those things. We've been talking, I think, for years about the prior ones of fair and equitable and inclusive. And now, I think people have been missing that connection. We're working towards how do we create greater connection in the organization that's more organic, right? And doing that in a hybrid workforce can be quite a challenge. And I think going back to your comment, Alicia, about intentionality, I mean, all of those 4 words together are a high bar for us to set for our organizations, and we have to be intentional about each one of them.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Would anyone else like to comment before we move on to our next question?
Yeah, I think I'll comment just to share that I think it also just needs to be named and prioritized. So from all layers of leadership, and leadership is not just management, across the company, there needs to be a shared ownership for the value that those things represent, both for the individuals and for the community. And so if any of those elements are broken and not addressed, then you're going to see change, and oftentimes not for the better. So how can you create that shared commitment with that shared language and reinforce it consistently, which is also really hard to do. So again, back to that intentionality, putting it at the forefront, making sure that it's included in those regular moments that you are all together, whether that's all hands or shared in-person time, to the point of being hybrid or fully remote. It's so much more important in those kind of orientations of an organization to make sure that you're using your words, that you're being consistent, that again, it is shared and it is owned by the broader community.
Thank you so much, Hyla. Completely on point, right? To your point, all levels own ownership, and then there's going to be discomfort, right? Because we're going to have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And when you take in different viewpoints, no one's an expert. And so with that, even success may look differently for everyone, but it's a collective success. So thank you very much for your thoughts. Let's move on to the question, because you have actually touched on it slightly with your response there. What challenges do CHROs and HR leaders face in assuring fair and inclusive employee experiences? And how can these challenges be overcome? Maria, we'll start with you for this question.
Of course. Thanks, Alicia. I think in my experience, we're still learning as we go. And a lot of companies started with this concept of equality, which obviously now we don't speak about, but we still have that lingering effect of thinking that we need to have programs that treat everybody the same way. And the main core of diversity, equity, and inclusion is to actually enhance the difference that each of us have within our organizations. And that becomes a challenge because as society keeps reinforcing the individuality, rightfully so, as a HR leaders, we also have to ensure that we enhance that individuality without necessarily creating conflicts or trying to be inclusive while you're inclusive for one part of the organization, but exclusive to another one. And how do you start balancing that out with programs that are really catering for those groups and start thinking about HR and even leadership more on an individualized basis rather than, oh, we have a policy that covers this for an entire population. And I think that's really, to me, the core of the challenge. How do we keep evolving our policies? How do we keep evolving our programs? How do we keep trying to ensure that we're not thinking as one size fits all, but rather, servicing certain pockets of the organization and making sure that everybody has similar or fair opportunities, whether those look the same or not. I think another area is how do we use data to our advantage or disadvantage? I think data is a significant point of challenge for CHROs or the HR industry because we are using DEI data to make decisions. And it becomes a gray area where these decisions are really focused on inclusivity, or we are actually using data to create some separation between one part of our organization or not. And I think it's creating that balance is what really becomes a big challenge. And how do we really try to make sure that when we start doing activities like inclusive recruitment, when we have a diverse slate, how do we really ensure that our leaders are really making the right decision and we're not just checking the box to say that we are inclusive or we're trying to be inclusive, but it's just another process that is not really helping the cause. I think a lot of organizations, including Cooper, we have ERGs. We are very big on having programs that are more focused now into these minority pockets of the organization so they have a voice. But we're also introducing mixed ERGs like inclusivity and diversity group or ambassadors, which are not specific to any sexual orientation or gender or any kind of other, let's say, defined box, but rather having an unbox group that actually carries a voice for those that don't necessarily feel identified to one specific ERG. Because if we go to the route of ERG, those are great, but they still become putting employees in a specific box. And what we have to understand is we are much more than a gender. We are much more than an age. We are much more than a social status or even sexual orientation. We're individuals. As individuals, we have different needs. How do we as an organization cater for all the needs without becoming so cumbersome that we cannot manage? I think that's a big challenge. And I actually want to hear from some of my colleagues to see if they see a similar challenge and what are some of the things that they have done to maybe minimize this.
I'd like to speak because we also heavily lean towards our employee resource groups, and I'm glad to see that there are other industries out there that really tap into and cater to that. And you're right, we are more than just one thing, and I think that's part of intersectionality is something that we really need to talk about. We hold many things. You can be a minority of a certain group, whether it's a race, but you're also a mother or a caregiver or a veteran or all those things. And how does it tie into everything else that we do? And I think I would like to go further and say, besides going to the employee resource groups and getting information from them, I would also say it ties into getting buy-in from the business itself to setting aside time to do these things. So I feel that sometimes out there, it can be very performative, right? Where we say we do this one thing for a little bit, then we go away. But it should really be ingrained and interwoven in our practices daily. And so how do we convince a business who is very focused on, creating their product or making sales, but setting aside time to do things like DEI training that is part of maybe interview training, unconscious bias. How do we go about performance management? So Maria, you said there's different types of people and we wouldn't treat them the same. So how do we go about performance managing someone who's an introvert, an extrovert, or anything of that sort? So I really liked how you touched on there, because I would say that's definitely one of our challenges our HR leaders face in.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is to actually use our demographics, not necessarily as a way to put metrics on, we need to reach a certain percentage of demographics of females or a specific ethnicity. It's more around showcasing the leaders constantly. This is your demographic. It's much more than a number of headcount or FTE. This is how it looks like. This is the generations. This is your genders. This is your ethnicity divisional. This is your people that are working remotely. How everybody is performing? How is your organization performing against the people that are actually the ones doing the job to produce those results? And how do we tie those two together? So every time a leader is making a decision, they're making it with the conscious understanding of how demographics will affect the business result. Because we are a business, right? I don't think any of us work in a non-for-profit. So we do need to produce business result, but not at the expense of not having that core front of ensuring the importance of our people being included, being happy, feeling comfortable in our organization, because they're going to provide better results for that.
Yeah, I think sometimes business leaders, they forget that businesses are built by people. And a more representative workforce is a better business, right? We have data to back that if you do invest in these like programs, if you invest in the people that help to build your business, you will build a better business. And so as we think about how we, again, surface that information, whether it be data, insights, generalized perspectives of the community, like how can we, again, make sure there's consistency and intentionality, and against that sense of shared ownership? Because if we want to create a better business, we need to invest in ourselves. Otherwise, we'll also see attrition, have other challenges within retention, both of leaders and individual contributors.
Yeah. There are a couple of things that are non-negotiable, like the training you mentioned, Cheska. I mean, because this topic is it's not volatile, but it evolves very quickly. And what it could have been okay this year in 2023, 5 years from now, it would be obsolete, or it will not be the right way to look at it from a business perspective. So constantly feeding our leaders with the right information, with the understanding of those definitions, the keywords, the inclusive word. How do you actually do an interview that does not cater for interviewing for the person that looks just like you, but actually opens up to really evaluate what that person can bring? Those are really key things that we constantly have to bring forward to our leaders through training and education, so they are equipped to make the right decisions.
I think just to pick up on that point, I know, Alicia, we probably need to move on to the next question, but I want to pick up on, Maria, you said this is constantly evolving, just to add one other piece to the discussion about what are the challenges that CHROs are facing here. I think it relates back to, the backlash that DE&I is receiving as well, right? Because, and I feel like, Maria, maybe you were hinting at that in the first part of your answer of just, I think prior diversity and inclusion efforts focused mostly on underrepresented groups. And now with the Supreme Court decision in the summer where higher education, affirmative action was struck down out of higher education, and now some of those attorneys are pivoting to look at businesses. I think CEOs are being a little more cautious in supporting their DE&I initiatives, or wanting to be vocal about some of the change that they're bringing about. And I've seen that kind of broadly. We've all seen that as a lot of chief diversity officers were released from companies. You've had a lot of cuts. Obviously, broadly, we've had layoffs in different sectors, but there's also been a lot of job loss in the DE&I space after a significant growth in 2020. So I think that's one of the challenges, is staying the course in the midst of additional controversy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, Shelley, for adding those thoughts. All of you are correct. There's intersectionality that people need to understand, and they actually have to take the time to learn what that means and educate themselves, and to your point, stay current. I applaud any child today. They know more about inclusion and diversity than I ever did at their age, and have to, educate adults. But to your point, Shelley, the law is on the side of inclusion, right? It is on the side of fairness and being inclusive. So we really having to just make sure all programs are fortified in that way to move forward collectively is the work and the skill and the intention. As we all know, without that intention and that effort, it does not happen on its own, and it actually can kind of be undone. Shelley, I want to aim this question at you with your thoughts. What are most effective ways to accurately measure an organization's progress against bias and practices that create unfair experiences for some colleagues? What works, what does not?
Yeah, I think just to pick up on, again, some of Maria's comments about data, it's really important that we're measuring these efforts, right? So, when we're doing things like diversity training, what are the outcomes that we're expecting as a result of that training? And defining that ahead of rolling that training out is really important. So I think that some of that is, what are the objectives we're trying to achieve with these efforts? And as an organization, making sure that we're really clear on those and then measuring against those objectives. I think sometimes, and this isn't bad necessarily, but Cheska, you said sometimes our efforts are performative, and I think that's right. And so we have to be really clear of what is the outcome we're trying to drive in the organization. As far as actual measurement, I know, Alicia, you talked a lot about employee experience in the first part of your response. And you said that you measure, or you're inclusive and you get a lot of survey feedback and all of those things. I absolutely think that's one of the ways that we need to measure our progress against bias is through our employee surveys, through focus groups, through that listening strategy, whatever that is in our organization. We use frequent pulse surveys. We use our intranet just to get ongoing feedback. In fact, we're about to launch our next pulse survey that's going to measure our year-over-year progress against some of our diversity initiatives. So trying to establish a benchmark and then annually or on some frequency go back and measure. But also, this is the thing that we've talked about as an organization, is making sure that we're taking that data and breaking it out by demographic, because we may have different demographics in our organization feel different ways about our culture and how inclusive we are, right? So really making sure that we're looking at the data to be reflective of all voices in the organization. And then lastly, just one thing I would add here too is just about reviewing policies and procedures to see what implicit bias exists in those practices. So I think that's really hard to do on your own. So we've partnered with an outside organization just to help us with that, because they have experience in this space. And so making sure that we can look at those, have some fresh eyes, give us some input so that we're making sure that bias isn't inherently built into our system. And then we can use some of the outcomes of hiring practices, promotion practices, selection for high potential leadership programs. We can use some of those as the output and the measures of how we're improving bias kind of broadly, as long as we've measured our internal policies and practices to make sure that they are as neutral as possible.
Thank you so much, Shelley, for your thoughts. And yes, you're completely right. The KPIs, as you know, businesses operate off data, so we can gather data in this space and reviewing it, responding, and making that known. To your point, as a military brat and having moved across many different parts of the world, my parents didn't talk about race at all. I experienced it, and I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know how to name it, but I knew that someone made assumptions about me that wasn't even how to say my name. I didn't have any kids for years. When I was in college, people assumed I had them. The assumptions about my viewpoints, assumptions about my ability, and they hurt. It actually prevented me from moving into certain opportunities or being seen as a candidate for them. And I had to find words to advocate and speak up for myself. So you are completely right. In the absence of anything, biases at the end of the day, they typically help us make shortcuts and make connections to things so we can quickly make decisions. but we also have to acknowledge there's an adverse effect to that, whether the intent is there or not. So thank you very much for sharing that. Do any of our other panelists have any other effective ways to share how you accurately measure an organization's progress against bias and practices that create unfair experiences?
I mean, I think we, at least for Cooper Surgical, we do fairly similar initiative as Shelley has mentioned. We do employee surveys. I think the biggest piece for us that we're trying to instill is to make sure that those surveys and those feedback result in an action. Because normally you get a lot of companies that implement employee surveys, whether it's once a year, every quarter, you get the survey, you announce your results, you kind of say, oh yeah, we increase here, we decrease there, but leaders do not take that at heart and actually make an impactful action to work around those whether it was a constructive feedback or something that clearly is impacting your culture as an organization. And I think having that responsibility to the leaders and actually making sure that they understand that they are the flaggers of our culture, and they are actually the ones that need to instill that culture of inclusivity by taking active actions on the feedback they receive, is extremely important. So now we're trying to kind of make sure that they're constantly having at least 3 actions, and we're following up to make sure that we're communicating, okay, what is the progress of this action? Is it getting an effect? And can we then, to the point of measuring the result, if we do a survey next time, is that particular area that was perhaps lower has increased? Did the action take effect or not? And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, because engagement surveys are like a picture. You can have a hair shorter in a year, and then next year it's a little bit longer. So organizations are also evolving, but at least you're constantly showing the efforts to the organization that you're taking that feedback at heart. And I think that's extremely important to ensure the employees constantly continue to give that feedback, because otherwise they won't feel engaged to give any feedback.
Thank you, Maria. Completely agree. Colleagues can see when it's performative, right? And when it's not sustained action or change. So to your point, not only just to show that you've listened, taking action, but sustaining it and really meaning it and being sincere really matters to colleagues to help them stay engaged and continue to really over-deliver what's needed because they feel like they're seen and they're valued. Thank you very much. Cheska, let me direct a question to you. What innovative approaches have you seen applied to build a more inclusive workplace culture?
Well, I can definitely speak on my company that I've been there for almost a decade. Just to give you background about our gaming company, we're predominantly male, and that's something that you would see across the board in the gaming industry as a whole. And that's something that we want to close the gap on to make sure that, you know, our audience who is diverse, they feel that they are represented, whether it's in the staff, in the workforce that we hire, whether it's in representation in the games that we play, character customization as well. So the way that we do it, and I work with very closely with our leadership, is to just really analyze the landscape and figure out how can we make the entire environment inclusive, whether it's the physical environment you work in your office, whether it's in our processes, in the perks and benefits that we offer employees, and it's really whole landscape. And so we tap into our ERGs to get more information on that. Do our perks and benefits, you know, work for you? What are some things that you'd like to see? Employee engagement surveys as well. You know, we have workplace culture committees that, you know, our well-being initiatives talk about what people like to see more of. And so I'll start with, you know, going into our ERG groups, the character customization. We have a cross-culture ERG, and we ask people like, you know, if you were to play our game and try to customize your character, what does it look like in terms of selecting race or gender? And a lot of people say, well, this is, you know, a fiction game. It's set in the universe and space, and we'd like to be more creative about that. So it's actually great to ask these questions, because if you didn't tap into these resource groups, you wouldn't know how to answer them. And so even looking at the landscape, thinking, okay, well, there's a stigma on anxiety and depression and mental health. And I think during the pandemic, people were more relaxed and more open to talk about those things. So then we started to introduce mental fitness programs. So we subscribe to the Calm app. I'm sure everyone's heard of Headspace and Calm, and we give that as a free perk and benefit for all our employees. We extend that to their dependents as well. And so we really encourage these conversations. And that's how that I'm seeing, you know, over the course of a decade of being with my company, of how we are evolving to be a little bit more inclusive. So that's some of the examples that I would give of what we do
I'd love to pick up on I'm sorry, go ahead, Alicia.
No, go ahead, Chelsea.
I was just going to say, I'd love to pick up, Cheska, on your comment. And certainly you elaborated on benefits, which I think is great, but also thinking about the work environment. So I oversee real estate as part of my responsibility here too. And so it's looking at the office design and making sure that it is especially as we're bringing more people back, that is one of the things that all the studies show about people preferring to work from home, is because, should they have a physical or a mental challenge, it's more comfortable for them at home. So how do we create that environment in the office as well? So I love that you mentioned just the office space and the physical working conditions. That's a great example.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
No, please continue.
Oh, I was just going to say, environment, you're absolutely right. We have people with disabilities, and we think, well, where would they sit? How would they get there? Are there lifts? Are there elevators for them? Or we have people that are deaf as well. And we've had to hire ASL interpreters to make sure that if there's a town hall, they understand what we're discussing. Even if there's a party, that they can be part of that discussion as well. So these are some of the things in the office itself that coming back to work as well that we've had to consider. And so I like that you touched upon that, because I feel like that's something that's overlooked.
Thank you very much for bringing in that dynamic. And you're completely right. I think even making sure when we invite colleagues to events, we're sincere, right? And we don't exclude with the intent to reward, but then thinking about the impact of that exclusion. So you're completely right. My husband's very tall and very short. He often says I married him for his height, but like, to your point, we got certain events, we have to get there early. I need to be in the front. I can't see. I don't have contacts, it's done. So you're completely right. Even thinking about the different colleagues' experiences and accommodating for that matters, which is why we're always in a state of learning, because even if we think we've nailed it, there's almost always a different perspective. And if you think about it, we want the different perspectives because it fortifies our idea, makes it stronger, makes it less likely for failure. And to your point, if we're in the office, why wouldn't we? We're all human, want to look out for one another and support one another, make it a supportive community. All right, so Hyla, I'm gonna direct this question to you. What is the next technology or trend that will be a game changer in ensuring fairness in workplace hiring, retention, and experiences?
Yeah, I'll start with a trend. And my take is that remote work, where appropriate for the industry, is here to stay. And it's good for diversity. Widening the talent pool offers more opportunities both for employers and for candidates to ensure that they're hiring the very best talent, not just the local talent. And with that, there's a greater opportunity to build a more representative workforce, right? That one that builds better business. And again, while not all employers, a majority of employers haven't yet embraced remote work, those that do have an advantage in recruiting top talent and in building a more diverse and inclusive workforce. Doesn't come without its challenges, right? Connectivity being a big piece of that. In committing to a remote workforce, how do you still create space and opportunity to connect and to feel engaged? As for technology, as we all know, there's a lot of buzz around AI and ML and its application in just about everything. And while I fully expect this technology to revolutionize most industries, I'm also realistic that it's going to take time. And that technology is only as good as the data that it reads. And unfortunately, most of our data was created by people. And people are flawed and they have biases. And so while this technology is valuable, we should also remain skeptical and diligent about designing and managing our data effectively. Nailing the fundamentals are key to assuring that we have the right data to inform and support the future. So as we think about all those different types of measurements and what we want to do we deeply understand what it means, the design in collecting that data to help us inform what we hope to build as an outcome? So, committing to remote work with all of its challenges, and continuing to explore but remain skeptical of the technology that's out there, focusing on, really clean data and how it's collected, and of course, how we use it.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I do agree. I think if AI can be leveraged and wielded properly, it may even free up leaders to be able to engage more personally with their team members and really connect on a personal level to build trust. Does anyone else have any thoughts on new technology or trends that are coming up that will help make the workforce more inclusive?
I just think, Hyla, you touched on it. We touched on it a little bit earlier. I still think, our workforce trends have not been settled yet as far as remote work, hybrid work, in-office work. I know one of my colleagues was at a real estate conference where it was all about that because of how that impacts commercial real estate. Our president of our company was recently at a CEO exchange. It was all about that, even though that wasn't the topic, it's what everyone is talking about. And I do think how companies are intentional. I'm going to go back to that word because I think those are so important. The words are important. And I think how companies are intentional about, regardless of their work model, making sure that they are inclusive, connected, fair, all the way back to the very beginning of our panel. We have to have intentionality regardless of work model, but those conversations are going to continue, I think, for the near future, for sure.
Oh, and indeed they will. The pandemic opened up a whole new work method that people absolutely love due to your point, comfort, flexibility, and other needs. All right, so I think we are now moving into the official Q&A of our session here. So if you have any questions, feel free, if you're in the audience, to provide them for us. I do have one question, and any of you can answer as you feel compelled. We are hearing that candidates are more aware of inclusivity at companies than ever before. Any ideas for ways to ensure that our fairness and inclusivity processes are seen by potential candidates? Who would like to take that question?
I'd like to answer that. I actually had a candidate ask me this question. That's why. It was a person who I would say is not even part of a minority group, but I thought that was interesting because it was someone that valued diversity and inclusivity, and it's something I didn't even expect for this person to ask and to be aware of it. And I thought that was very lovely, actually, that they cared about that was a value of, should I go to this company, I would like to see that it exists. That's part of my values as well. And I feel like we're seeing a shift from the workforce of people, wanting maybe more money and different perks, as opposed to now, what is your value as a company? Does it align with mine? And I noticed that. So a lot of it is just transparency. Talking about what we do as a company and being open about our processes and our practices. And so I ended up speaking to this candidate about what we do internally, talked about our diversity program, what does that entail? I talked about employee resource groups. I talked about results, such as before having a DEI program, what the landscape look like, and then after implementation, what does it look like now? What do we expect every year? So our company before that, we didn't have published data of what our DEI looks like. And if you go on our website now, after going through the practice and going through surveys and all that stuff, we're very transparent about gender pay gap. We're very transparent about what our workforce looks like now. And then we talk about, and then what do we do after that? So that was my experience with the candidate of how we be a little bit more transparent.
Thank you so much, Cheska. To your point, there's a lot of published reports that companies give and provided in the recruitment process to help colleagues or potential colleagues understand the inclusivity. As you know, that's the metric colleagues are using to know if they want to engage or join an organization. Anyone else want to add to that before we move on to the next question?
I think that's an internal and an external focus, right? I think we're all focused also on our employment brand and how do we make sure that, we are showing those practices, but also being truthful about our culture, right? I had the pleasure of listening to the former CHRO of State Farm Insurance, and she talked about, they did employee videos that were called I Am Who I Am. And they had personal stories where employees wrote out, their backgrounds and their stories. Alicia, I love how you've shared your personal stories as part of your moderation today. And I think being able to show employee stories on our websites as part of our employment brand, obviously, those of us who are HR practitioners probably know the downsides of that, right? If that employee were to resign or, just some of those things that happen. However, I found that I Am Who I Am campaign really impactful because, it allows employees to have their voice shown externally and have that reflect the culture of the company.
Oh, Shelley, you hit the nail on the head. I am a strong proponent of individuality awareness. So not even just understanding who you are, but advocating and speaking up for that, because to your point, you can tell that through your story. And that's typically how, to your point, we can even give different perspectives on the journey, right, internally within an organization. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so let's move to another question. Bias is a big deal in our company as upper management is focused on the quality of data for hiring and retention. Any tips for understanding how bias affects hiring?
Yeah, I'll take this one as kind of the resident recruiting person, but I think a big piece here is actually looking to the structure and intention of your hiring efforts. Is there structure? Let's start there. Is there consistency? What are you measuring during your hiring processes? How are ideally you're measuring competencies? And again, preferably those competencies align to the expectations for what that individual might need to do if they were to earn that role, and how they would be measured internally, right? So if you can create that structure, if you can name those competencies and drive that through line of internal and external evaluation, you can seek to reduce biases, right? Biases are all around us. They're embedded in every person based on their lived experiences. They're going to be present. The goal is to build awareness. And through awareness to then try to mitigate those biases and to create checks. And so there are things that you can do structurally to try to reduce some of those things. And then again, yeah, it's awareness, it's consistency, it's intentionality. It's also imperfect. And so seeking to figure out ways to balance that imperfection with that intention.
Yeah, and I think, Hyla, we all have biases. There's not going to be, I don't think in the near future, we are going to get rid of those biases because everybody has a certain preference. That's who we are as individuals. I think what's going to be extremely important is to make sure that our leaders, the more that they are aware of their own biases, the more they're going to be able to calibrate that to not bring those biases as a way to select people on their hiring processes, and also panel interviewing. So you're having different points of views. I mean, the more you collaborate in making decisions about who do we want to bring to our organization, the less amount of biases you're going to be directing to that decision, because we do have it. I think one thing that as organizations or in the HR world, it's we need to train our people to understand their unconscious biases. They are unconscious for a reason. You're not thinking about them all the time. So the more you are aware or become, create that awareness of what your preference is and how does that affect your decision, the more you're going to be able to calibrate that and to make it objective rather than subjective to your likes. And that happens to all of us. I think it's not specific to leaders. It's also in HR.
Very true.
Oh yeah, as we all are people, to your point, that's something we all have to be aware of to detect. To your point, being very clear on what you're measuring for and what exactly you're looking for, even if you have to use a rating system. And also breaking down your whole recruitment process. What's the impact of your process? Are certain individuals or groups just not getting through, and why? And with that, you can find a lot of opportunities to clarify and provide some objectivity to those parts of the process. Due to time, I'm going to move to question 4. Any tips for an HR leader at a company that is woefully behind in making all of this a priority?
I love that question. And I would say to anyone who feels that way, take heart, because while it's easy for us, I think, to be on a panel and to say that we have it all figured out, I want to go back to the comment about this is constantly evolving. So Maria said, this is an evolving space. When we started our more intentional DE&I journey, we went to an external partner and I said, I love a good maturity model, but I said on a maturity model, we're not even born yet. We're like embryonic, and I was embarrassed actually to say that to an external provider that was there. And, I think the more that we talk with one another, the more we realize a couple things. One is not everyone is as far along. All of us probably are not as far along as we want to be, right? So even starting from wherever you are, is showing that intentionality that we've talked about the entire time, right? And then I loved, Maria, your word was so great, imperfect. I mean, just know that this whole effort is imperfect. And we are working with our employees, our leaders, our companies to continue to evolve and just get better. So again, take heart. You're not alone. And just the fact that you're listening and wanting to participate in the panel shows that you have a vision for what it could be.
Thank you so much, Shelley. To your point, intentionality, transparency, and just honesty, right, of where you are. And, with that, colleagues can work with that if they know you sincerely hear them and are trying to move forward collectively together to help in that process. All right, so I think we're actually at time. Nick, do we have any time for any more questions, or do you want us to close the session?
Well, you know what? We have about a minute if you want to try to fit a quick one in.
Okay. So do any of our panelists have any closing thoughts for any of our attendees today?
I would just like to say that I think that HR folks out there should really be strategic business partners and try to align themselves with the leadership and to be heard. I think the old HR model of being very passive and reactive, people thought, we were a paper mill, you come to us very reactively. It's different now. We are proactive partners where we are helping you with organizational design and creating workplace culture and engagement. And I think we really need to move forward to that if we want to keep growing.
Thank you so much, Cheska. To that point, I think know it's a team effort and you are not alone. And if you find that you are, find your allies, find your advocates, and get their support and buy-in. I feel different perspectives is always going to fortify and make what you're doing even better. And being open to being uncomfortable, awkward, and continuous improvement. And you'll find that you'll make a lot more progress than you thought. I think being on the side of good and making that decision that you're going to move forward in the right way and in what's best for people, you can't go wrong and you're protected in that movement. So we really appreciate you panelists for giving your thoughts and insights. Truly helpful for all of us today. It's been a pleasure being able to talk about such an important topic with you all.
And thank you all for such an excellent panel discussion. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.